basics of aerobatics. Understand the 3 axes of control, and you'll look like a pro. Since the beginning of powered flight, daring aerobatic pilots have been wowing spectators at air shows around the world. Today, while modern aerobatics can sometimes be more accurately characterized as difficult to perform cloud dancing convulsions, the good news is getting into radio-controlled aerobatics really isn't all that hard. Most aerobatic maneuvers are comprised of several basic techniques simply strung together, either in part or in total, depending on the maneuver, giving rise to some fairly impressive aerial stunts, and that's exactly what we're going to show you on today's show. Hi everybody, welcome to Radio Control Hobbies. I'm Chris Chianelli. We're out here at this gorgeous flying field, and what we're talking about today is the basics of aerobatics. I've picked out a few airplanes which I think are all fabulous flyers. Over here to your right, the yellow airplane, is the Horizon Hobbies Hangar 9 Fontana. It's an example of a very modern aerobat. In the center, we have one of my favorites, the de Havilland Chipmunk from Great Plains. It's a very popular airplane from the 1960s circuit, a scale airplane flown by Art Scholl. One thing I really like about it is the graphics. It's very easy to see at a distance. This is an extremely smooth flyer. I really like this airplane. And over here to your left, last but definitely not least, is World Model Super Sport Senior. This is definitely classified as an aerobatic trainer. It's very lightweight, has a very light wing loading, and because of that, it's an extremely forgiving airplane, but it will still perform very smooth aerobatic maneuvers. Airplanes operate within 3 axes of control. The pitch axis, which is controlled by the elevator, the roll axis, which is controlled by the ailerons, and the yaw axis, which is controlled by the rudder. We're going to do a maneuver now which is performed only with the pitch axis using the elevator. It's called a loop. Come upwind with a loop. Now with a loop, you start from level flight. Try to keep the radius of the loop the same all the way around. From level flight, pull up. Right about the top of the loop, chop throttle. Try to keep the speed of the loop the same all the way around. And then add throttle back when the maneuver is complete. The maneuver you just saw is called a loop. It's a pitch axis maneuver. And we accomplish this by using the elevator. Next, we're going to do a roll, which is a roll axis maneuver. And to accomplish this, we're going to use the ailerons. out from level flight.
Pull very slight up elevator, then go full on the ailerons.
And that's your simple axial roll.
Coming up next, one of my favorite maneuvers, the stall turn. It may look difficult, but with a few pointers, you can be doing some pretty stall turns and other maneuvers using these simple techniques.
Brought to you by Hobbytown USA, where you'll find toys and hobbies for all ages.
Welcome back to Radio Control Hobbies. I'm Chris Chianelli. Today we're talking about the basics of aerobatics, and we're covering the 3 axes of control. So far you've seen pitch, which we did a loop. You've seen roll, which we did a roll around the roll axes. Now you're going to see a maneuver that covers the yaw axes. It's called a stall turn. The airplane will pull up, cut throttle, and give full rudder, and rotate around the yaw axes, come down, and pull out. That's called a stall turn. Now with the stall turn, you pull up, add full rudder and chop the throttle. And you get a stall turn to the left. Down leg, pull out, add throttle. Right now you might be saying, well, a loop and a roll is a pretty simple maneuver. To do it right is not so simple. It often takes input from the other control surfaces. Also, many more complicated maneuvers are just combinations of parts of loops and rolls. For instance, an Immelman is a half loop with a rollout at the top with the airplane going off in the other direction. Same thing with a split S. Airplane comes along in this direction, you pull an 8th loop, you climb out a little bit, you do a half roll, and then you do a pull out with a loop and fly off in the opposite direction. Now here's a really, really nice one of my favorites, called the Cuban 8. It's a combination of loops and rolls. You pull into a loop and let it go, but about here, you do a half roll. Then you do another loop, and you want to do another half roll, preferably in the exact same spot you did the first half roll. And that's a Cuban 8. Partial loop and a roll. Part of a loop and a roll. Putting these together, you'll come up with some pretty awesome maneuvers. Let's take a look. Do a split S into another split S. This is a split S. And I'm going to follow it up with another split S right now. good implement. Cubinate, start from level flight. Roll, loop. Do a half roll. Then loop. Do a half roll, preferably in the same spot you did the first one, and pull out. That's a cubinate.
Up next, tips on setting up your airplane and radio for aerobatics. Welcome back to Radio Control Hobbies. Performing aerobatic maneuvers is not that difficult with just a little practice. We've shown you some basic ones, a loop, a roll, an immelman, a cubinate, but another important factor in performing successful aerobatic maneuvers is the setup of the transmitter.
I'd like for a moment to talk about the features available to you on the radios that help you adjust the flight characteristics of your airplane while it's in flight. Joining me today is Director of Marketing from AMA, Tom Schwinn.
Hi, Chris. Welcome.
Thanks for joining us. Tom, first we're going to talk about dual rates. Do you use them?
Yeah, actually I do, but I use exponential a little bit more. But let's talk about the dual rates, and I know we're going to get into expo later.
Yeah, you use both.
I do use both.
And I'd like to point out that dual rates are available probably on most radios, even the less expensive ones.
All the way down to every radio except the absolute most beginner type.
All right, so you're probably going to have it on your radio, and here's how it works. You get two choices of throws from one stick. You give full throw on the stick. Okay, that's the high rate. With the flip of a switch in flight, you can lower the rate. High rate, low rate. And this helps you fly two different ways. You can fly more smoothly at the low rate or a little more radically at the high rate. Every control surface, the elevator, the rudder, and the ailerons, you can add this feature to. You can add it to one of them, or you can add it to all. Which ones do you like to use it on your airplane?
I actually use it primarily, Chris, on the aileron and the elevator. Sometimes a little bit on rudder if it's scalebird.
All right, now a lot of guys use dual rate. It's very popular. I'm not saying one is better than the other, but I'm one of the guys that prefers exponential, and you kind of prefer exponential too.
Yeah, I do. That's my first choice.
All right, they're both good. We're not saying one is better. Let's take a look at what exponential is. With a non-exponential configuration, the amount of stick movement is directly related in a linear fashion to the amount of control surface movement. But with an exponential setup, it's a curve. And you can get the same amount of ultimate throw, but what the curve does, it desensitizes the throw around center. And you'll see this on the graphs as Tom is going to demonstrate.
Let me show you on the rudder first, Chris. I'm going to move the rudder stick here. You can see that it's moving in a one-to-one relationship with the stick itself.
And on your readout, you can even see the straight line on the graph.
Absolutely straight, all the way from the extreme throw back to the center. Now I'm going to change over to exponential, which we have set up on the elevator. Move the stick. I'm moving almost half, almost maybe 2/3 movement there before the elevator moves. Same thing on up. You can see it back on down. And on the graph, you can see how much more curve there is in there.
Yeah, I'd just like to point out, Tom has set in a lot of exponential, 90%.
90% plus.
Just so we could demonstrate exactly what it does. Most of the time I fly with about 25 to 35% in there.
Typical range.
Yeah, a little bit on the rudder, sometimes none on the rudder. And like with fixed wing, you kind of set it the way I do and leave it alone.
Yep, I do. I set it up so that I don't have to change the switch. As soon as I want to go to expo, it's there.
See, when I'm flying, I don't like fiddling with a lot of switches. I like to dial in the feel I like for an airplane, then just go fly. I think it's a lot more fun. One of the things you want to do to get the most performance out of an aerobatic plane is laterally balance it. Now, we all balance for CG. If we didn't, the airplane wouldn't fly right. But an aerobatic plane really comes into its own if it's properly balanced laterally. Now, Tom and I have set this up to show you how it's done. we've put one string in the back off the rudder post and one off the prop shaft. And we're going to lift it up. And as you can see, it has a bias towards the right wing. The right wing is heavier. It has an offset motor. That might be the problem. So Tom, you're going to add some weight?
Yeah, I'm going to add a little weight here on the light tip, Chris. Put it right over here on it. What we're looking for is that the airplane comes out balanced or as close as we can get it to level.
Now you see, that's a lot better. Now what we usually do is we don't use stick-on weights. Tom, how do you do it?
I normally take brads, and it may take quite a few of them to do it. Drill small holes in here, countersink them, and then either put CA or epoxy over and then put a nice finish over to seal it up from an aerodynamic standpoint.
If you laterally balance your aerobatic plane, you'll see a huge difference. It'll really track through the maneuvers. For more information on aerobatics, go to our website, DIYnetwork.com.
Coming up next, the wild world of stall maneuvers, snap rolls, knife edges, and tail spins. These maneuvers can really heat up those Saturday afternoons at the flying field.
Welcome back to Radio Control Hobbies. I'm Chris Chianelli. What we're talking about today is the basics of aerobatics. Now, if you've watched the show before, you may have heard me say you don't want to steer the airplane around the sky. For optimum flight, you more or less want to redirect its flight path. Now, this is also true for aerobatics, but it's also not true. When it comes to certain aerobatics, you really want to jam the controls to their full extent, especially in the case of stall maneuvers. Let's check it out. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a snap roll. This is stall maneuver. In aerobatics, you also come across the situation where certain controls sort of take the place of other controls, which is the case in knife edge flight. The rudder, in a way, kind of acts like the elevator. And then controls sort of act in reverse. In inverted flight, if you don't want the airplane to go augering into the ground, you want to give it down elevator, because when it's inverted, that would be up elevator. There we go. There we go. Now I'm going to take it upstairs, and I'm going to do a total tailspin. Do about 3 or 4 spins and recover. Dump it over. 2, 3, 4, and recover. That was a tailspin. Okay. Get enough altitude, start the throttle back, up elevator. Dump the controls. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Neutralize, gain airspeed, pull out. That was a nice tailspin. If you give aerobatics a try, I guarantee you'll have a new challenge every time you go out to the flying field. And it doesn't have to have anything to do with competition. You can train for competition, but look at me. I've been flying for 30 years, and I do it purely for fun and relaxation. For more information on aerobatics, go to our website, DIYnetwork.com. I'm Chris Chianelli. Thanks for joining us here on Radio Control Hobbies. We'll see you next time.
Welcome to another